This Expert Insight webinar series has been created for you to bring the expertise and insight of nationally and internationally recognized thought leaders to frame but not bound our thinking on a series of 10 topics relevant to empowerment. Hello and welcome to this webinar on well-being, or more specifically, meaning and purpose at work. My name is Sarah Chapman-Trim and I'm the Empowerment Head within Strategic Command. Within the Command, we have developed an empowerment program focused on improving the lived experience of our personnel as a means of enhancing personnel capability. This webinar series is part of achieving that aim. Our focus today is on empowering people through meaningful work. Meaning is one of the 4 individual level or psychological outcomes of empowerment, the others being self-determination or autonomy, a feeling of competence in delivering your job, and impact, the feeling that your voice is heard and your ideas and your contribution are valued by your colleagues and the wider organisation. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Professor Katie Bailey and Strategic Command Deputy Director HR, Laura Price. Katie Bailey is Professor of Work and Employment and Head of the Human Resource Management and Employment Relations Group at King's Business School, King's College London. Katie is a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, the Royal Society of Arts, Higher Education Academy, and Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, Honorary Fellow at the Institute for Employment Studies, and a member of the Association for Coaching. She is an award-winning author with a PhD from London Business School and has written or co-authored numerous books, articles, and blogs on meaningful work, employee engagement, and strategic approaches to people management. She was co-editor of the Oxford Handbook of Meaningful Work and of Employee Engagement in Theory and Practice. Her work has appeared in the Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, and Academy of Management Executive, as well as a very wide range of international peer-reviewed journals. And in late 2019, her article, Building an Ethically Strong Organization, won the MIT Sloan Management Review's annual prize. Currently, she is co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Management Reviews, and she has been on the editorial boards of several leading scholarly journals. She's frequently asked to speak at conferences around the world on what makes work meaningful, and she runs workshops for organizations keen to develop a sense of meaning and purpose. She's been invited to participate in a number of government-led reviews of work and employment, including most recently the Government Office for Science Working Group on Rebuilding for a Resilient Britain Post-COVID. Laura Price is currently Deputy Director HR within UK Stratcom, responsible for delivering the people function across the blended workforce of approximately 24,000 military and civilian personnel in country and overseas. She is the former lead for the Civil Service Workforce Strategy, focused on implications of macro trends such as automation and demography, whilst also leading the strategic workforce planning capability build across the civil service. Prior to that, she acted as private secretary to the Chief Operations Officer for Civil Service HR and in the Cabinet Office, and delivered as an HR business partner in DWP and as a policy lead in the MOD. Katie, Laura, welcome. Laura, we look forward to your reflections on Katie's presentation, the themes that resonate, and the programs and initiatives we have within Strategic Command and the MOD to enhance meaning and purpose at work.
Thank you. Very excited to be with you both today.
Katie, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation. So I wanted to start off by telling you a story. So when I was talking to people about what makes their work meaningful with my colleague Adrian Madden, we talked to people in a whole range of different organisations. I was very struck when I went into a retail firm and talked to the people working there on the shop floor. And one of them said to me, well, you know, the day I found my work really meaningful was the day when all of us had worked all through the night because we had to refit the store and it had to be ready for the following morning. So we were all there. There was a great sense of camaraderie and teamwork. We were all very much in it together. Our manager in the morning took us all to one side and told us what a great job we'd done, how wonderful it all looked. And when the customers all came in, they said, doesn't the store look great? And we all felt this great sense of pride and achievement in what we'd done. And I'm going to come back to this story throughout the presentation because for me, it very much reflects what meaningful work is all about. Now, when we think about empowerment, as Sarah has explained to us, there are 4 components to that. So there's competence, self-determination, impact, and meaning. And that's the part of empowerment that I'm going to be focusing on in today's presentation. So why does meaningful work matter? Well, the research that I've done with my colleagues, where we reviewed all of the empirical articles that have been published on the topic, very clearly showed that where people find their work meaningful, they're more engaged, they're more satisfied with their work, they have higher levels of well-being and happiness, they're more committed to their organisation, their employer, and also they tend to perform better. We also found that when we find our work meaningful, we're less likely to want to quit our employer, we're less likely to take sickness absence, we experience less stress and depression at work. So clearly, there are very strong imperatives at both the individual and the organisational level to think about the importance of meaningful work. So when you actually talk to people as well in practice, it's very clear that meaningful work is something that resonates with all of us. So there was a piece of research done in the Harvard Business Review recently, which showed clearly that the two top long-term career goals for people across all generations was to make a positive impact on my organisation and to help solve social or environmental challenges. In fact, almost half of all workers would take a pay cut of around 15% just to work for an organisation with an inspiring purpose. So it is something that really matters to us. And it's interesting to reflect as well in these times of COVID, which is so challenging for everyone, that a recent survey in the States found that as many as 41% of workers were actually thinking about quitting their job to find something more meaningful in the post-COVID environment. There's no doubt that this current crisis has caused people to think much more deeply about the role of work in their lives and the value that they feel their job adds to society and the wider economy. So what is meaningful work? Well, there are several things that people tend to talk about when they think about what makes their work meaningful to them. And the first one is the sense of making a contribution. So this can be a contribution either to society, to the economy. It could be a contribution as to just one other individual that you work with. But there's very much this sense that when your work is meaningful, there's a sense that someone or something is better as a result of the work that you do. The second thing to notice about meaningful work is it's work that stretches and challenges us. So it's very rarely the case that people who find their work easy will find it meaningful. There's something about meaningful work which requires us to engage our thought processes in what we're doing. It's something that we can find quite difficult. The third point is it's work that we care about. So if we don't care about our work, we're not going to find it meaningful. And finally, it connects us with other people, either in the sense of feeling that we're making this contribution or in the sense of working as a team. And we can see all of these, if we think back to the story I told at the beginning about the retail worker, we can see all of these present. She felt she was making a contribution to her company, to her team, and to the store as a whole. It was work she found difficult. She had to work through the night. It wasn't easy or straightforward. She really cared about it. She wanted that store to look good, and it connected her with her teammates. They all felt a sense of camaraderie and pride in the work that they'd done. The other thing I would say about meaningful work is that it's very subjective. In fact, in the research that I did with Adrian, what we were very struck by was the fact that when people start talking about what makes their work meaningful, they talk about themselves, their family, their friends, what matters to them outside work. I've spoken to many thousands of people over many, many years about all sorts of aspects of their work, but it's only in relation to meaningfulness where people actually talk about their family life. So, and we're going to see some examples of that in just a minute. I think it's important as well to think about what meaningful work isn't. And so meaningful work is not easy work. It's not something that we can get up and do without really thinking about it. It requires us to engage our brains. It's not a quick fix. So in other words, if you run an organization, you can't just think, well, I'm going to bring in a meaningful work strategy and everybody's then going to find their work meaningful. It's not as simple as that. It's not something that's easily controlled. Meaningfulness isn't something that can be imposed on us from the outside. We all have our sense of what is meaningful to us. And that, as I mentioned before, connects us with what matters to us as individuals in the context of our wider lives and family. Meaningful work isn't something that is just for the elite. people often say to me, well, meaningful work that's all fine and good, Katie, but surely it's something that people are just concerned about if they're in maybe professional jobs, ordinary people doing ordinary everyday work like most of us. That's not really something we're concerned with. Our research, on the contrary, showed that meaningfulness is something everybody can connect to. We talked to people ranging from senior executives through to people working in shops, nurses, soldiers. We talked to artists. We talked to people working in the clergy. We talked to people working in offices. We talked to people who were sweeping the streets. Everybody could talk about what made their work meaningful to them. And meaningfulness was as important to people across that whole range of different types of work as it was for people in what we might regard perhaps as elite jobs. And the final thing that meaningful work isn't is the latest fad. The notion of meaningfulness is something that goes back as long as there have been human beings in existence. We've thought about what matters and what is meaningful to us. There's nothing faddy about meaningful work that there perhaps might be with certain other management initiatives. So I'm going to share with you now some stories of meaningful work that were told to us by some soldiers that Adrian and I spoke to when we were doing our interviews. And these stories very much reflect some of the themes that I've been speaking to you about. So one said to us, I've done a lot of things that have developed me as a person, and also by doing that, allowing me to give back to the army and develop other people. So I think I've reached a good level of potential. So this is about reaching your potential. It's about development as a person, not doing that easy work. Another said to us, I do think what we do is important. And the reason why I say that is without us, if there was a war, who would defend the country? Who would give people hope? So this is clearly an example of a feeling of contribution. This notion of giving people hope is something very aspirational. Another said to us, the people that you are with are the people that help you deal with it. You work as a team, you help each other. So this is everyone working together, a sense that you're not alone in this. Another said to us, if I've helped one soldier come through that door and get their training, given them a bit of confidence and they're a better person for it, then I've achieved my job and I feel good inside. So this is about helping other people to reach their full potential as well. And then finally, one sergeant told us, when I left the army from my sergeant's mess, I was given the dinner night and there were all the people that turned up. I got up and I did a speech, and some of the guys got up and they told stories of my past. My family were there. I got up and thanked everybody and said how good the army is. And look at me, even being a bad girl, I've reached warrant officer. So that in itself, it's just pride. It's a pride thing to be part of an organization that is so diverse. So it's clear from what we were told here that this sergeant, she felt a great sense of pride in her work. And you can see here a great example of the connection that people make between their personal lives, their families, and their work when they talk about meaningfulness. So where does it all go wrong? Now, unfortunately, in the research we did, which was published in the Sloan Management Review article I did with Adrian, we found that there are 7 things, these 7 deadly sins, things that managers tend to do that create a sense of meaninglessness for people. And the first one of these is around a values mismatch. So people who didn't feel that their values were the same as those of the organization really struggled to feel a sense of meaningfulness in their work. And this happened, so for example, we talked to cathedral stonemasons who were working using traditional methods, and they very much wanted to work in the old-fashioned ways, using old-fashioned tools, and work on the stones that they were using to repair the cathedral slowly using traditional techniques. But they were always being told to speed up by their line managers. And this created a real sense of values mismatch and a sense, well, actually, do I really belong here? Do I really fit in? The second one was being taken for granted. And we were surprised by the number of people who said to us, do you know, my manager comes into work in the morning and he or she walks straight past me, doesn't even acknowledge me or even say good morning. And this sense of being taken for granted or just not being recognized for who we are, it's very damaging to a sense of meaning. The third one is being given pointless work to do. So if we don't understand why we're being asked to do certain tasks, or we can see that there's no value to them, we really do start to wonder what the meaning is of the work that we do. So academics, for example, spoke to us about dropping spreadsheets into a black hole, forever being asked to provide data. They never quite knew what this data was used for. They strongly suspected it wasn't used for anything, and they were repeatedly asked for the same information by different people. And this created a strong sense of meaninglessness. The fourth deadly sin was unfairness, where people felt they were being treated unfairly. It was very difficult for them to find much meaning in what they did. And we had examples of people who were encouraged to apply for a promotion that they afterwards found out had actually been given to one of their colleagues, and there was never any chance that they were going to get promoted. And this sense of being treated badly by your organization undermines this sense of meaningfulness. Number 5 was disempowerment, feeling that your voice and your views don't count. And we had examples here of nurses who had developed a treatment protocol for their patients, but who were subsequently overruled by senior nurses or doctors who came in and suggested different ways of treating the patient that they didn't feel from their professional experience was the right one for the patient. And this led to very strong feelings of meaninglessness. The 6th one was isolation. And we saw earlier the importance of this sense of camaraderie and teamwork for feeling a sense of meaning. And people who felt isolated very much lacked that sense of meaning and purpose. And this could, in the extreme, be cases of where people felt that they were being bullied or harassed, or simply feeling that they didn't connect with their team around them. And the final one was being placed at risk by their employer. And this could be psychological risk, or it could be physical risk. Again, some of the nurses talked to us about being left on their own on wards with patients who had challenging behavior. And at times like that, wondering why they were doing the jobs they had. So I've got some more stories from some of the soldiers we spoke to, just to illustrate some of those points a little more deeply. So one said to us, sometimes, you know, the phone is ringing and you're just dealing with stupid problems that seem to go on, and suddenly the day is over and you don't feel like you've achieved anything. So this feeling that there's no point in what you're doing, that you're just dealing with things that perhaps somebody else could deal with or that really didn't matter, leads to a sense that you haven't achieved anything and undermines the sense that what you do makes a difference. Another talked to us about feeling controlled or micromanaged. And this taps into a lack of autonomy, a lack of freedom, this sense of disempowerment. Another one said to us, I know I've no more career progression. That's it for me for now. I could work 24/7 and it won't change the price of fish. I'm never going to get a pay rise. I'm never going to get promoted. I'm never going to get a promotion, a bonus, a handshake, or anything. So here we can see this sense of being stuck in the organization, even in cases where you can't get promoted, even the sense of, well, somebody saying to you, well done, shaking your hand, even that wasn't going to be possible. And this lack of recognition was undermining this soldier's sense of meaningful work. Another talked about their boss saying, do as I do as I say and not as I do, and feeling, well, actually, that's not setting a good example. That's not good role modeling. I don't share the same values as this person. And then finally, one talked about a few times that they'd been out on exercise in the Outer Hebrides or on Salisbury Plain where it was freezing cold and you haven't slept for 10 days. And you're thinking, is this really what I want to be doing? And it's quite demoralizing. So being placed in a situation where you're being asked to do unpleasant work in an unpleasant situation, but you're not really sure if it's going to make much of a difference. So what can you do if you're a manager to avoid this sense of meaninglessness and to actually create an environment where people can find their sense of meaning? In the paper, we talked about creating a meaningful work ecosystem, a setting where people can surface and find their own sense of meaning. It's not about imposing your sense of meaning as a manager on your team, because they're all going to find their sense of meaning at an individual level. So again, if we think back while we're looking at this diagram, just to what the retail worker said to us right at the beginning. First off, there's a sense of organizational meaningfulness. So on the left-hand side of the model, feeling that you work for an organization whose values you share, that you're proud to work for, who has a clear sense of purpose. Feeling that your job is meaningful. So this is feeling that there's a clear line of sight between your job, what you're being asked to do, and what the organisation is trying to achieve, that somebody somewhere is benefiting from your job. Moving further round to the right-hand side now, we can also think about task meaningfulness. So this is going deeper into the job, deeper beyond the overarching job that we do, to how we're actually spending our time day to day. So we might have a really nice job description that's written down where it looks as though we're being asked to do really important and meaningful things. But if that doesn't mesh with actually what we're being asked to do day to day, then that's going to undermine meaningfulness. So really thinking through with your employee, what exactly is it that you are doing in your work, and why do these tasks matter? So if you're the academic, why are you dropping these spreadsheets into a black hole? What actually happens to them? Where do they go? How are they used? And finally, at the top, we have interactional meaningfulness. So this is about having meaningful connections, either with your co-workers or with clients, having a sense that you can see from your own interaction with people how others are benefiting from what you do. And if you put all of that together, you have this holistic sense of meaningfulness. And that was very much what the retail worker talked to us about when she said, we all had this great sense of pride in what we'd done and what we'd achieved during the night when we'd worked and refitted the store. So it's about creating an environment or an ecosystem where people can find their own sense of meaning. And there are 4 key takeaways from the talk today. The first is to note that people already have a sense of meaning in their work. The role of the manager is to create an environment or an ecosystem where people can find that meaning. The second is to note that meaningfulness is multifaceted and it's subjective. So what is meaningful for one person may well not be meaningful for another. Discerning meaning is important for positive individual and organizational outcomes. So meaningfulness isn't really a kind of a nice to have on top of all sorts of other things that we're trying to do as managers. It really is terribly important and kind of underpins all of the other activities that we're engaged with. And finally, managers need to avoid the 7 deadly sins, or they're going to risk their employees surfacing a sense of meaninglessness. It's not necessarily the case that the same things that drive up a sense of meaning are the same that create this sense of meaninglessness. There are the 7 deadly sins that managers need to think about avoiding, and they're really important as well alongside the activities aimed at creating this positive ecosystem. So thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand back to Sarah now.
Katie, thank you for a brilliant presentation and full of lots for us to think about. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that resonated with me and then ask Laura to reflect likewise, and we'll have a bit of an interactive discussion. The 15% pay cut, that most people would take a 15% pay cut in order to deliver meaningful work. Let's not let that get out, is what I would say. So the esprit de corps aspect, I sat on a 1-star promotion board. Gosh, lockdown has distorted our sense of time, hasn't it? Some time ago. And the candidate asked the panel, why should I come and work for the MOD? Please tell me about your experience of the organization. And I said that human beings are characterized by their search for meaning, and that you don't need to look too far for that within the Ministry of Defence, whether civilian or military, that it is an inherently meaningful organization through its organizational purpose. You touched on challenge at work and the importance of challenge, that's a key feature in people experiencing meaning in their work. I also reflected on, as you were speaking, meaningful purpose and purposeful meaning. And perhaps that's something that we can ask you to reflect on a bit later, and the difference between the two. You also spoke about the number of people involved in your research and the breadth of vocations and professions, and the common experience of people all experiencing meaning or wanting to experience meaning in their work, regardless of whether they were a part of a professional elite. That touched on one of the reasons I chose to be an occupational psychologist, actually, is because everybody can talk to you about work and its meaning and its role in their life, even people who are chronically unemployed or experience worklessness. So that was interesting to me. I've got some other things I wanted to add, but I might hand over to Laura and we can revisit those.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Katie, thank you so much for such an insightful presentation. I think Sarah's done a really good job there of capturing some of the key points, which I was thinking about as I was listening as well. But a few more which I just wanted to touch on. So one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning as part of that initial anecdote was around camaraderie. And this is really interesting to me in terms of kind of, so how do our peers and our friendships at work give us some of that meaning as well, so that we come into work not only to deliver on the organizational purpose, but to help our colleagues to also deliver and to kind of boost their meaning in work as well. So that's something I think I'd be really interested to touch on. One of the other things you brought out, and this reflects back on some of previous work that I did in terms of workforce strategy and the difference in terms of what our demographic splits look for in work and how we get meaning across all different generations, across all different workforce types, and how we really engage people in a different way. Where do we need to tailor that and where don't we? So really interested, based on, as Sarah says, the stat in terms of 15% and the fact that that's across all different generational boundaries. Are there any other areas that are similar to that? And where do we need to be a bit more divergent and a bit more tailored? Another area which I suppose we can't do one of these in lockdown without talking about COVID, I think. And one of the areas that kind of was playing through my mind listening to everything that you were talking about was how do we adapt at the rate that we've done throughout this past period? How do we adapt our leadership and our management to people's differing needs in a state of kind of the next normal, as well as we have done over the past few months? So how do we continue to create meaning for people when their home life situation may have been particularly challenged, or they've had to shift everything 180 in the space of kind of a couple of hours because their other half is a key worker, etc. How do we get that flexibility built into the systems and continue to create meaning for people in amongst all of kind of the tumult that exists outside? And I think the other thing for me was around thinking about how we bring people into an organization. So one of the things you touched on just there towards the end, around when someone was being interviewed or someone is brought in, and around how do we understand their value set from the output. I'm reflecting back on interviews I've sat in recently in our policies and processes, and whether or not we actually explicitly ask people what it is that they come to work for. So are we almost starting on the back foot in terms of not having that two-way dialogue and kind of really checking whether or not the cultural value fit is there from the off? So much more than that, but they were kind of some of my headline points, but really interested to get into a discussion.
Katie, we've sort of given you a lot there. Did you want to start with the COVID issue and your work on that, perhaps?
Yeah, we can't avoid the COVID issue, can we? It's foremost in our minds at the moment. And I think that this current environment is very challenging for meaningful work for a lot of people. I think if we think back to the first lockdown, we saw jobs being designated as people designated as key workers, and everybody else being sent home. And so people who then weren't designated as key workers, I think a lot of people then started to think, well, actually, does my job really matter? If I can just be sent home, I can be furloughed, I can be, sent home not to do anything, or my job can be done at home in isolation without my colleagues. It really prompted a lot of people to think very deeply about their work, their place in society, and their contribution. It also caused a lot of people to reflect, well, key workers we're expecting them to go into work to take risks, but they're not always being rewarded as well, perhaps, as certain other jobs. So I think wherever you were in this whole scenario, I think that this really did throw up a whole lot of questions that people have about the meaning of their work, which I don't think have been resolved to this day. And I'd be very interested. I haven't done research myself on the situation with COVID and meaning, but I've been reading up quite a lot about research other people have been doing and think the way that things are developing. So yeah, I think it's a huge challenge personally.
Particularly in light of mass redundancies, we have seen, are going to continue to see, it's that old chestnut, isn't it? You are not what you do. There is more to you than that. And your research highlights that, doesn't it? Because you ask people about meaning at work and they reflect back on their personal sphere. We take away that lens and that means of achieving financial success for people and what impact that has.
Yes, absolutely. There are people, obviously, many, many thousands losing their jobs, and young people who now can't get onto a job at all, having left school or university. in a situation where there are no jobs in the sectors which typically provide entry-level work. So this is another sort of generational issue, I think, that we're facing as well. So absolutely, how do we identify ourselves? What is the meaning of our work if we have no work? So it's a good question.
So Laura has spearheaded the introduction of a command charter within Strategic Command, articulating our 3 core values of progressive, innovative, inclusive. Did you want to comment some more on that, Laura?
Yeah, so and I think it's a really good link, actually. So one of the ways that we're trying to kind of shape and develop the culture within the command, recognizing that we're not going to change things overnight, but actually we need to be really kind of clear with people around what it does mean to work here, what are the expectations, and kind of how do we have that clear reference point. And in some ways, it's proved more challenging because obviously the Army, the Navy, the Air Force have their value set. There's the civil service value set. There's all of those layers of identity already built in. So what is it, as we started to think around what it meant to be within Strategic Command, what is it specifically taken from all of those that binds us together? And as Sarah says, kind of progressive, innovative and inclusive felt like the right areas that we wanted to go in. We need to be pushing forward. We're developing on our domains, developing in our the breadth of the type of workforce that we need to have and the skills that we need to have. So how do we bring that together? I think my reflection on it so far is actually people aligning themselves to a value set takes some time, and they need to see it played out by senior leadership time and time again. For it to really start to embed, as opposed to just reading it in all kind of the various forms you can imagine that we're putting it into. And I think it links back to your point in terms of how do we create an environment where people are genuinely interested to come, they're interested in bringing other people with them. And linking on to that, I'm quite interested in your views in terms of how do people almost project values in kind of the work that they've done onto their colleagues? Is there any evidence which shows that that's a real kind of positive area that people do regularly, or is it a particular challenge that you've seen in your work?
Well, I think that there's a significant challenge around the whole area of linking values and meaning in an authentic way. As I think many organisations have got a set of values or mission, a vision, a purpose. And it's something, there were discussions, there were workshops, people developed them, and then they sit on a shelf somewhere, which might be a metaphorical shelf, and nobody quite knows what to do with them. They don't really inform anything that anybody does. There's no sense of them being driven through the organisation. So yes, embedding those values authentically in the organisation is a massive challenge. It's not something that you can do once as a project and then it's all done and dusted and you can move on to something else. It's embedding those day to day in the work that managers do as they go about their tasks. And HR has a big role to play in this, in designing HR policies, training, development, performance evaluation, reward systems that all underpin the importance of people acting those values as they go about their work.
And how well, so just pulling on that, how well, based on your research and the work that you've done so far, do you think kind of using whatever organisational anchor is most appropriate, how well do you think we train line managers to do that? Or is that an area which you think is, I don't know, a particularly pertinent one in terms of getting people's meaning and sense of purpose at work up?
Well, I think the role of the line manager is absolutely crucial, both in avoiding this sense of meaninglessness and in boosting a sense of meaningfulness. I mean, if you can work for an organisation with a great sense of purpose, but if you see your line manager not acting out those values, then not supporting their own sense of meaning and not creating an environment that enables you to find your own, then that's really challenging. And involving line managers in those conversations about, well, what does it actually mean? You've got your values you've described very eloquently, but you know, if I'm a line manager, what do I do with those? What do you want me to do differently in my job today as a result of the organisation having those values?
And that is the challenge, isn't it? Is the what is it and what do I need to do? Yeah, so sorry, Laura, you were going to say something.
No, not at all. No. I think that echoes well. And I suppose in some ways that kind of, as you say, the translation between the piece of paper to the actual delivery is always the tricky part in anything to do with kind of human behaviour. just pulling back to one of the points that Sarah referenced in her summary in terms of, I suppose, the people's willingness to potentially take a pay cut or whatever else to engage. I am really interested in that, because I think it says a lot about kind of how people pitch work, and actually if they're getting enjoyment, almost the payback is not just financial, it's everything else that comes with it. Can you talk a bit more around kind of what you've found within your research on that?
Yes, obviously we all go to work to earn a living, and pay is a motivator. But at the same time, work is more to us as individuals and human beings than just a pay packet. And we've known that for many decades. We derive a sense of who we are and our identity. I think you mentioned the word identity earlier. We derive a very strong sense of our identity as a person from the work that we do and from the people around us at work. It's the people we spend our time with, the people who reflect back on us, the kind of person that we are, because we see people doing the same sort of work that we are. So in an organisation like the MOD, I should imagine there's a very strong sense of camaraderie and a shared sense of values and purpose about what you're trying to achieve. I would imagine as an outsider, seems to me that there would be a very strong culture there. And I think that really does mean an awful lot to people, especially your colleagues and your co-workers. People really want to feel that sense of unity and connection, and all the research on meaningful work really emphasizes the importance of feeling part of a team of people. Even if what you do is largely on your own, and there are plenty of people who do a lot of work on their own, there are still points of connection with others, either in the organization or outside. And those points of connection are very important in terms of helping people to see why their work matters and how it's meaningful. So as I was saying earlier on, if you have these more sort of negative interactions with people, you may be dealing with clients who are complaining all the time about the organisation, or you work with a group of people you don't identify with. That's very undermining to your sense of meaningfulness. And all the research shows that if you find your work meaningless, you're more likely to quit and go and look for another organisation where you fit in. I was running a workshop once for an organisation. It was actually a nursery, a group of nurseries. They had a very, very strong sense of meaning and purpose in their work. They're working with young children. But many of them said, well, do you know, I left this other nursery to come and work for this one because I didn't feel that we shared values in the way that we looked after the children. I didn't connect with my colleagues. It just didn't feel like a nice place to work. And so this sense of what happens to us on a daily basis at a very micro level really influences the way we feel about our job in general, and it influences the behaviours we're likely to enact as a result.
So just widening the aperture a little bit, something we haven't yet touched on, but speaks to the heart of, if I can use the term, the defence purpose. And in so doing, I'm including the civilian workforce and the contractors, is fun. And it's a bit cool, which is why civilians and contractors, like to sign up to the defence purpose. One of our other webinars in the series was with Professor Emma Barrett from the University of Manchester, and she talked about resilience in extreme environments. And she mentioned 3 types of fun. Type 1 fun, which was fun at the time and fun in retrospect. Type 2 fun, not fun at the time, but fun in retrospect. And then type 3 fun, not fun at the time, not fun in retrospect, and let's never ever do that again. And so I think for military people watching this, but also the civilians and contractors who work in that defence environment, there is a great deal of fun to be had, even in harsh and at sometimes degrading environments. There's a sense of pride and purpose, which then feeds into the meaning at work. So Laura, did you want to sort of comment on that, reflect on that?
Yeah, I think I'm already smiling listening to those descriptions.
Yeah.
And I think what a great way of kind of summing it up, in terms of, no doubt everyone will immediately have a thing that comes to mind against each 3 of those definitions, especially that last one. I think there's quite a long list. And I think it is really important. So fun at work, and I know personally I take an awful lot of my energy from the people around me, and I think in some ways that's what's made the last few months quite hard in a number of ways, as to not having that kind of personal interaction and the opportunity to have those kind of light-hearted conversations in kind of in the office space. But I think the meaning that's derived from all of those kind of activities and the interactions, for me, really links into our kind of the churn and the turnover rates that we see. So especially when I look across all of the statistics in strategic command, the areas which have particularly high engagement levels, there is a direct correlation with lower churn and turnover. Sometimes that's positive, sometimes it's a negative. You need kind of fresh energy and ideas coming in, but also maintaining a group of people who are subject matter experts and have that really kind of core inherent connection to the organization is a real positive. So I do think there is something more to be looked into there. And I wonder whether actually how people get their sense of fun, either from having the opportunity to go and, I don't know, do a day trip down to an operational area in defence, for example, versus having an opportunity to spend an afternoon learning coding. How do we tap into what that looks like? My gut sense is that we probably don't spend enough time understanding what that looks like for people. And actually it would be quite an easy and potentially quite cheap way of getting people really engaged with their work and kind of seeing that reward focus in a different way to the monetary pay packet that people see at the end of the month.
So Katie, before I ask you to reflect on that, just to give a lived experience of that, Laura, I had a staff of 30 sailors in Australia when I served in the Royal Australian Navy, a mix of junior and senior, but mostly junior. And they were employed as writers, so in an administrative capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They just finished the training course and they were desperate to get to sea. And we were at the fleet base in Sydney. And so I contacted a couple of the ships and said, look, if you've got spare training bunks going, can we just send some of these kids out for a week? And it just the ability to send them out for 5 or 10 days, I got 6 months worth of, animation and passion and energy from them, because it re-energized them, reinvigorated their commitment to the organization.
Yeah, I love that. I love that example that you gave and the definition of fun at work. And I think you're absolutely right, Laura, that we've all been very challenged with fun at work in the last few months, haven't we? And fun often arises spontaneously in interaction with colleagues, as you say, in the informal environment. For many people who've been working from home or people who are working in the workplace but having to keep distance from people, wearing masks makes communication so much more difficult and much less spontaneous and more difficult to have fun at work. And I'm sure that fun has a really big role to play in meaningfulness, because it's a way of connecting with your colleagues, isn't it? You're unlikely to be having a huge amount of fun sitting at home with Zoom, although I'm enjoying this, I have to say.
It's harnessing technology, though, isn't it, to be together apart, to coin the term from Stephen Riker from the University of St Andrews. So, Katie, you touched on slavish adherence to process and ensuring that data is fed back. And Laura would know very well, in her capacity as HR director, we coined the phrase, you said, we did. So we always make sure that we feed back survey results to people. Can you reflect on that, but also take us back to the 7 deadly sins for line managers in terms of removing meaning from work, and perhaps things that people can do, and lessons that you've captured with some of the workshops you've done with different organisations?
I mean, I think what we were very struck by in the research was that all of the things that people talked about that made their work meaningless were to do with things that line managers did. And a lot of the things that they talked about in terms of deriving meaning were from things outside work that were nothing to do with the line manager. So it was really striking to think, well, actually, line managers are doing an awful lot of things that actually remove meaning from people. So they can't even get to the point of adding any meaning for people. And I think you made a point about feedback, Sarah, just now in your question. And feedback really did emerge as very important. People wanted some very basic acknowledgement, as I mentioned. They really didn't like their line manager coming in the morning and just not acknowledging their presence. Just very, very simple things like that, which would be so easy for a manager to do. To remember to say good morning to everybody, how are you? And genuinely checking in on people, especially in the current climate where people's home lives are very disrupted and very challenged. I think everybody is finding the current situation very difficult. And so it's much more important than even normal for line managers to recognise the humanity of their employees and the difficulties that they're going to be facing at home, and how that might be impacting on their sense of meaningfulness at work as well. So line managers have an important role to play in acknowledging, recognising employees, providing feedback. And feedback is absolutely crucial, as you've noted, for a sense of meaning, because if you don't know that your work has had an impact on other people, how are you going to find it meaningful? So managers really need to think about what they can do to enhance that. So one organisation I worked with, which was a business-to-business PR agency, and we ran a workshop for them on meaningfulness. And I think there was a general assumption that people were finding their work meaningful because they were doing very high profile campaigns, but actually people never had a chance to sit down with the clients and look at the campaign and think, well, actually, we did a really good job here. Wasn't this great? It was so successful, and have that direct interaction with the client. They didn't have the opportunity to sit down with their colleagues in maybe sort of less formal settings and brainstorm ideas and share learning. So there was a sense of being very much on a treadmill, very rapid, fast pace of work, no chance really to get that feedback and to reflect on what they'd done and to share with your colleagues. And so those emerged as very important aspects of meaning that were perhaps missing a bit in that particular setting.
So we are certainly experiencing a situation at the moment because of second lockdown and the year that has been to date of people working longer and harder, I would suggest. You know, I certainly am. And it's a proximity thing, because you are working from home more routinely, you have the laptop there, and I'll just do 15 minutes of work, it becomes 45 minutes of work. And I have certainly noticed, I'm sure Laura has as well, colleagues online at odd hours that perhaps they might have done that in the past, but not as regularly and routinely. And I know that there is an increasing sort of conversation and banter about burnout, which is obviously counterproductive in terms of retaining a workforce and people having the energy to derive meaning from their work. Laura, did you want to comment on some of those things?
Yes, it takes me back to some of the quotes, Katie, that you had up earlier in terms of people getting a sense of purpose from helping and from feeling needed. And I wonder whether over the past few months, whether that's really played out. So whereas previously people got that kind of the in the moment reaction of thank you so much, that's super helpful, and that was enough to get them through kind of that part of the day or whatever else. Now we're in kind of national position where defence is being seen as kind of a key supporter, obviously alongside the NHS and alongside others, and people's natural willingness, because of their value set being aligned to the organisation, is seeing them put in those longer hours, seeing them really push, because actually we are helping a national effort, and that in itself brings a sense of pride, I think, for an awful lot of our workforce to be connected to that. Whether or not that's sustainable, I think, is a real challenge we're going to face. Realistically, the current position that we're in, it may change, it may ebb and flow a bit, but it's unlikely to go away completely. And therefore, we need to shift our ways of working. And I wonder whether we are having the conversation, certainly at leadership level at the moment, to be able to say kind of these are the characteristics we want to keep. This is the momentum and the camaraderie and the kind of the passion that we've got, and we need to retain that, whilst also recognising that we need to probably pull back in some areas, reprioritise so that people do have better space, or risk people feeling as though they're either, to your points earlier, doing meaningless work because actually things are moving so quickly, priorities change, stuff gets dropped, etc. How do we keep that balance? I think is going to be really key. And I don't know, Katie, whether that's something you're seeing in other organisations as well, and any kind of obviously tips that you can bring in terms of how we best manage that. Greatly appreciated.
Well, I think there were two things that have really struck me from what you've both been saying. And one is about burnout due to excessive pressure in the current setting. And the other is about constant changing priorities. And both of these things risk undermining a sense of meaningful work. One, because if we're so exhausted that we can't function, we're not going to find any meaning in anything. It's just not going to be possible. And the second, if we're working in an environment where 1 minute we're being told one thing, then the external environment shifts. So actually you've got to drop what you were doing there. Now we're going to do this. And then that changes again because of the rapid evolution of the unpredictable environment. and the impact it's having on everybody's work, it also becomes very difficult to get a sense of meaning, because you think you're in that pointless work scenario, aren't you, where I've just spent 3 months doing X because I thought this was what we needed, and now I've told, oh, X doesn't matter anymore, we're on to Y now, so why have I just spent those 3 months doing that? This is very, we're in a situation where I honestly think that it is a real threat to people's sense of meaning in their work. A lot of it out of the control of individual organisations, but there are things that are within the control of organisations, and that comes back, and the onus is very much on line managers to really check in on their employees. How are you? What hours are you working? Are you managing to get a balance? Are you taking some time to rest and recover? Are you taking your annual leave, or have you just been working solidly through all year? And also thanking their employees. Well, look, thank you for doing that. I know things have moved on now and we've got to reprioritise, but the work you've done has really helped us to lay the foundations, deal with the current crisis, just help people to see that what they've done really does matter and makes a difference. And I think the onus is very much on line managers to do that. Then, of course, line managers themselves are then under pressure as well. And so the whole organisation can become very stressed at a time like this. And especially, as you were saying, Sarah, in sort of a defence environment, there is that extra risk of people being burnt out because you are key workers during this national crisis.
And CDS has recently spoken about, or been asked by the media to reflect upon, the increased risk of violence and instability as a result of the economic downturn that will be the outcome of COVID. So actually our environment may yet get increasingly complex in 2021, 2022. You talked, Katie, about it's not a quick fix, that there's no menu of options. We have recently introduced Laura's team, it's a comms initiative, really nice We Are Strategic Command, a series of blogs where people are reflecting on their lived experience of their employment within Strategic Command, and having had a look at a few of them, they really focus on meaning and purpose. Cognizant that it's not a quick fix and it's not a menu of options, are there any stunning examples of organisations that you've worked with or seen where they have managed to achieve considerable meaning and purpose at work, even in sectors where we wouldn't necessarily equate it as readily as we might we do with defence?
Yes, I mean, there are organisations that have been successful in this, and often it comes down to very small things that they've done. So, for example, one local authority where we did interviews with street sweepers, we were surprised and delighted to see how much meaning they found in their work, and a lot of that was from their ability to see a connection with the work that they did, clearing the streets, clearing up after festivals and so on, collecting people's rubbish and helping the environment. And what the council had done is they'd put images on the sides of the lorries of items that had been made from recycled goods. And so it was a very visual reminder for people. I'm sweeping the streets, I'm emptying people's rubbish, but at the end of it, I'm helping to create a more pleasant environment, not just for our generation, but for future generations as well. So people were able to see a connection between their daily tasks and what was a much more significant contribution in the longer term. And those images really reinforced that. Another organisation that we worked with, I think the nursery in particular, had invested very significantly in coaching training for their line managers. And so they were able to have often frequent coaching conversations with their employees so that they were able to talk to them about meaning. I think earlier on, Laura, it was you said, well, actually, we don't really talk about this at work. Those organisations where people are able to have conversations about what does your work mean to you? How do you think you're contributing? That really does seem to make a difference. And it's not often a natural conversation for managers to have with people, but having space for those conversations, that really does seem to make a difference as well. And sitting down and really thinking about what is people's daily experience of their work. So those organisations where people have actually been able to sort of sit down as a group and compare notes and think, well, actually, what's happening here? What are the key sources of meaning? Well, what are the barriers? What are the things that are stopping us to find meaning? And develop strategies to deal with those. And as you say, Sarah, it's not really necessarily a quick fix. It's something that takes place over a period of time and needs to be maintained regularly. It's not something you can do. It's like having your hair cut. You know, you can't just do it once and it's done. You have to keep cutting it. And so in the same way, you have to keep having these conversations about meaning. You have to think about what's the connection between what the organisation is trying to achieve. And you've both given some great examples in the Ministry of Defence about what your overarching goals and values are. And what's the link between that and what each individual person is doing on a daily basis? So how do people feel that they're contributing to those overarching goals? And organisations that have enabled those conversations to take place, they seem to be the ones that are able to keep track of it. Because in any organisation, it is going to ebb and flow. You're not going to create a state where all the time everybody's going to find their work meaningful. It will fluctuate. It's inevitable. And so it's having those conversations, those doors open that enable you to check what is happening and take action if things are maybe starting to slip a little bit. Those really just seem to come across to me, at any rate, as being important actions that can be taken.
So just listening to you speak then, Katie, I think one of, not the only, but one of the natural homes for those conversations is the empowerment programme within the Ministry of Defence and within Strategic Command, because actually it is, meaning is one of the 4 pillars of the lived experience of the psychological outcomes of empowerment. So hopefully we're achieving some outcomes in that regard. Laura, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so the thing which it links back to a previous point that was made in terms of data. So I'm just thinking around listening to Katie, what you're talking about there in terms of it ebbs and flows and people's positions move. And at scale at the moment, the way in which we kind of capture how people feel about where they work, do they feel empowered, do they feel like their job creates sufficient value, etc., is through the people survey and through the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey. We track it whole force. But what we don't necessarily do yet, which I think both we need to get after and we need to kind of work through the data complexities of doing so, is how do we connect up where people feel meaning, both with where they are in an organisation, where they are in their career, what kind of demographic they're from, etc. Back to that point around tailoring the experience, both not only as in a one-to-one with an individual and their line manager, but also at an organisational level. How do we almost preempt some of the things that an individual may bring and then supplement that with an individual's kind of personal values that they bring, rather than assuming this kind of broad brush, everyone will think the same, everyone needs the same. And if you work in Strategic Command, you've got really high work-related kind of meaning and purpose, and you're really clear on what you're doing. Whereas if you're in a different area of defence, you may not. And I think that's a very kind of exaggerated example. But I don't think if you scale that down, it's too far off. I think we do try and kind of stovepipe people. And actually we need to get into the data to understand people's views and how they're feeling at many more kind of touch points throughout the year, but then also do something with that data in terms of turning it into how do we shift that group's lived experience or understand it better. So definitely some good food for thought there.
So we've recently had the lived experience report within the MOD, which has looked at the inverse of meaning and exclusion in some ways. It is highlighted some of that for select groups, so women and BAME in particular. But it has enabled us to create a roadmap for how we can find better inclusion for those groups and harness their talents and things. And there is an increasing trend in the wake of the #MeToo and the Black Lives Matter movement. We talked in the race webinar about the fact that it's not a moment, it's a movement, and it's here to stay. People finding meaning and purpose and finding their voice, but privileging narratives as data. And Katie, you would reflect on this through your time as an academic. We are privileging qualitative data far more in the current climate and in recent years in the wake of #MeToo than we have done in the last 2 decades, I would suggest. I think that's here to stay, and I think it's a positive.
Absolutely. Throughout many years now, we've focused a lot in organisations, I think, on quantitative data, doing surveys and perhaps trying to put people into boxes which aren't really a comfortable fit for them. And these more qualitative approaches are much more rich and enable a much deeper level of insight into what people are experiencing and thinking. Certainly in the area of meaningful work, it's very much the case, as I was saying earlier, it is a very subjective thing, and that it's not necessarily the case that we can neatly divide it up by demographic or by job title or any job area or anything really as to what people are going to find meaningful. I mean, when we went into organisations of a whole range of different types, we were finding very different descriptions of them, how people surfaced a sense of meaning in their work. And as I mentioned before, a lot of this is very strongly connected with their lives outside work and what matters to them. And I think that's the key thing with meaningful work. We can talk about strategic HRM, we can talk about employee engagement. All of these things are about the job, but they're not about the whole human being that we bring to work. And I think this is where the notion of meaningfulness really connects us back with our humanity again and who we are. You remember the soldier who I quoted earlier was talking about the dinner that she had, which I know there's a formal name for it, which I've now forgotten, to celebrate her being a retirement from being a sergeant and so on. And it was having her family there, it was having her colleagues there, sharing stories about her, having that sense of pride in being a member of the army, all coming together in that one moment that for her really encapsulated herself as a whole person. It was her family, her friends, her colleagues, the army, everything all together. And that's very much what meaningfulness is all about. It's this holistic sense of us as human beings.
So Katie, that's been absolutely brilliant, and Laura, to chat with you about this today, and a very rich contribution to the Empowerment Programme. Thank you both very much for your time. Katie has expertly articulated for us the reasons why meaningful work matters by identifying the link between increased feelings of meaning at work and increased job satisfaction, well-being, happiness, commitment and performance, and the link between decreased feelings of meaning at work and the intention to leave, absenteeism, stress and depression, all of which have negative financial implications for individuals, employers and society. The business benefit, if I can use that shorthand term within the military sphere, is clear. Thank you for watching this webinar on meaning and purpose at work. I hope you'll join us again for further webinars within the Strategic Command Empowerment Programme Expert Insight series.